I want to talk about an experience that I think a lot of us maybe share, which is this idea that brought me to herbal medicine and brought me to really devote my life to the study of plants, the service of plants, and the connection between plants and people and the broader ecology and people. And that's an experience of having received a revelation or having received healing, clarity, connection, a sense of home, a sense of meaning, a sense of purpose. All of these gifts that come to us from the world of nature through the plants are gifts that I think all of us can at least relate to if we haven't experienced them ourselves too. So I'd like to start by kind of framing the gift story in the context of herbal medicine and in the context of herbal fairy tales, really, because so many herbal fairy tales are full of stories of gifts and the gift cycle. Then I want to take a bit of a broader view and talk to you a little bit about some research that I've been very engrossed in over the last few years, which comes to us from physics and from cosmology, but really speaks to those same feelings and connections and intuitive understandings we've all had when engaging with the plant world, connecting with the plant world, and being an active participant in this dance with plants that everyone who lives on this planet has enjoyed. And then I'd like to really hopefully convince you that engaging with herbal medicine gives us this powerful tool that provides meaning and context in the crazy world in which we live today, and can help keep us strong in the struggles that lay in front of us in the 21st century. And we need strength, and I am 100% confident that nature has our backs, and it has plants and fungi that can support us in these powerful, incredible ways. So after we talk about that, I'd like to introduce you to the concept of the gift cycle, at least the way I see it. The concept of this give and take, and this power to sort of amplify vitality, resilience, and strength that nature possesses. I want to explore that a little bit. And finally, bring it back to our personal experience, our day-to-day experience as plant people, by talking about some of my favorite plants that can help us on the path of that gift cycle. Plants that we can use for inspiration, but plants that we can also use for strength. Because one of the things that we'll see is that engaging with the gifts of nature, engaging with the gifts that plant medicine and the medicine of mushrooms bring into our lives, it seems beautiful and incredible at first, but it actually takes a lot of work, commitment, and ongoing engagement. The day-to-day work is crucial, and the rewards that this work brings are incredible. For ourselves, of course, for the people we love in our life, but as Karis was just saying, herbal medicine goes way beyond individuals. Herbal medicine has the tools and I think the cosmology, the stories, and the philosophy for helping to heal communities, society, culture, and ecology. Herbal medicine is born of the indigenous mind. Despite the pills you might see on supplement store shelves today, herbal medicine is still very wild and weedy. And the chemistry of the plants that we know and love is untouched by human manipulation, and I am so grateful for that. So I want to kind of try and explore that a little bit this evening in the time I have with you, and hopefully leave you with some practical ideas and maybe some plant allies that can walk with you on this journey of personal healing, of community healing, I think of cultural healing and cultural remodeling, and intersecting with all of this also techniques and tools to heal our planet and our ecology as well. So I do have some pictures and some slides to share with you. They're mostly pictures of plants, and that's really how I like to do it. So I'm going to take a moment and open up some slides, some pictures of plants for us to look at together. And I'll start with a story that I found really fascinating, a story about sort of a pretty well-known medicinal plant. And that plant is mandrake, Mandragora officinalis. And that's what you see here. Mandrake is a solanaceous plant, meaning it's a cousin of tomatoes and peppers, the nightshades, which are amazing foods to us, but also contain some powerful poisons and some powerful medicines and some powerful spirit plants too. And mandrake, I think, falls right in that latter category as a powerful medicine and a powerful spirit plant. Now, those of you who have heard about mandrake have probably heard that it's an herb that, can definitely have a mind of its own, can definitely take us to strange and wonderful places, show us new and wonderful vistas. But one of the things that I first learned about mandrake was that it was thought that the root itself had a living spirit inside it, which you could tell because when you pull the root up, it looks like a little human. And any of you who've seen the Harry Potter movies or read the Harry Potter books maybe have run into this quality, this root that when you try to pull it out of the ground, shrieks in terror with such intensity that it kills anyone who hears that scream. Well, this story is a little different. It's not about harvesting the mandrake root. It's about a man who was walking through the forest one day, and he's walking along, heading back through a forest path from the village back to his home, and he comes across this huge oak tree that he'd really never seen before. And, 20, 30 feet up in the lowest branches, he can see tangles of mistletoe in the oak leaves. And, the oak trees that harbor mistletoe are thought to be the most powerful of the oak trees. Mistletoe being sort of magical dew that crystallizes into plant form in the leaves of the sacred oak, just out of the air and out of the spirits moving through the air. And mistletoe and oak being two of the most sacred herbs for the sort of druidic tradition of Ireland and Europe. So as he notices this mistletoe up there, he has this thought and this feeling that, this is a special and a powerful place. And he looks down at his feet, and between the roots of the oak tree is this flowering mandrake with the purple flowers, just like the plant you see in front of you now. And, knowing the power of the mandrake, because these were times when people knew the power of these plants, and the fact that he's standing in front of an oak tree and the mistletoe is above him, this man just has this moment of sort of realization and connection and feels an incredible sense of place and power and meaning. Not exactly what kind of meaning, but just this sense of power and magic. And right at that moment, he hears a voice coming up from the roots, from the mandrake plant at his feet. And the mandrake is speaking to him because, of course, back then, and maybe still today, plants communicated directly with humans, for those who could hear. And the mandrake tells him, "I'm not for you to harvest, my friend, but if you come back tonight and you bring me meat and bread so I can eat my fill, you won't regret it." Now the man was very poor and he had very little to eat, but he heeded the words of the mandrake. He walked back to his home. He collected what little bit he could find, and he brought it back to the mandrake and said, "Well, here you go. I offer you this food, this meat and this bread as a gift." And the mandrake says, "Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Come back tomorrow." And the man walks back to his home and, he spends that night hungry. And when he comes back to the mandrake the next day, she's sitting there under the oak tree, kind of in the dappled shade of the forest. And she says, "I really appreciated your gifts yesterday. Bring me more meat and bread, and you won't be sorry." So for the second time, the man goes back home and he collects what he can find, and there's not much left. A little bit of dried meat and some crusty bread, and he brings it back to the mandrake that night. And the mandrake says, "Well, thank you again for your gifts. You've shown me your true devotion now 2 days in a row. And I'll tell you, from here on out, you must bring me meat and bread every single night. And if you fail once to do so, you will die." And the man says, "What? I brought you these gifts like it's the last food I have, and you're telling me now I have to keep doing this, and if not, you'll kill me?" Of course, he knew that Mandrake had this power and he wasn't going to mess around with this plant. But he was very distressed because he didn't see a way out of this. The Mandrake said, "Don't worry. I forgot to tell you that if you do this, you will get back twice the amount of food that you bring me. So bring me what you have every night, and the next morning you'll find twice as much on your table." And the man went back, not quite knowing what to believe, not quite knowing or understanding what he'd gotten himself into. But the next morning when he woke up, he found twice the amount of food that he had brought to the mandrake root. Fresh bread, golden and crusty, fresh meat, dried jerky, sitting there waiting for him. He ate and had his fill, and there was still more left over to share with his neighbors. And that night, he brought a little bit of that meat and that bread back to the mandrake and said, "Here are my gifts to you again. I offer them with great gratitude." And the mandrake said, "Same to you, and we'll see you again tomorrow." And so the story goes that the man kept going every single night, bringing this food back to the mandrake, and the mandrake kept putting meat and bread on his table for every single day for the rest of his life. And the man lived happy and healthy and was able to share his abundance with his friends in the community. Now, my understanding is that he never failed on his promise and he kept bringing the gifts to the mandrake root. But what I really love about this story is that it tells us a couple of things. First of all, this idea of the mandrake grabbing the attention, or the oak and the mistletoe grabbing the attention of this guy as he was walking through the woods and just transfixing him and engaging him in communion and communication with that moment in time, with the spirits of nature and the plants that were there in that moment in time. So this engagement, first of all. And then I really appreciate the fact that almost on faith, the man was willing to bring gifts, to listen to what the mandrake said and bring gifts back to this plant. And in so doing, also commit to this crazy job, right? With the threat, of course, of his life if he fails on the commitment. So there's this other piece too, right? This bondage that happened between the man and the mandrake. But it was almost a willing bondage, because as soon as he realized that his food would be returned to him twice as much as he had given to the mandrake plant, he realized that this really wasn't servitude. This really wasn't a prison for him, but it was a cycle of renewal and a cycle of abundance for him, where whatever he brought to the mandrake was returned to him twofold. So this bondage that he had with the plant and with nature was something he was willing to engage in because of the rewards that came back to him. And he also was willing to give up his resources in order to get the ball rolling, so to speak, to have some skin in the game right away. And I think these are such fascinating elements because they're the key elements of what I want to talk a little bit about later, which is this gift cycle, which is ultimately how I think nature works. And it might seem a little mysterious, you know, this idea that you can bring offerings to the mandrake plant and she returns those back to you twofold or threefold, or there's many different stories that kind of go along the same lines. They might be a little hard to relate to. But what's maybe a little easier for us to understand is what happens when we put an offering of grain into the ground. And humans have been doing this for, some people say 20,000 years, at least 10,000 years. We've been taking grain that we find in nature, and rather than eating it, we've been returning it to the soil. And this has led to a range of other stories that are actually very similar to the story of the mandrake about nature spirits like John Barleycorn, for example. And the story goes that, you know, you harvest John Barleycorn and you thrash him and you abuse him and you eat him up, but you save some of his body and you bury him back into the ground. And of course, when you return him as a gift back to the soil, John Barleycorn returns the gifts back to you in an abundance that is tenfold. And of course, that is the reciprocity of nature and the reciprocity of agriculture. But nature works this way beyond agriculture, although this idea of planting grain and getting the gifts back tenfold is a little easier for me to kind of grasp and understand. And of course, we can explain it like, you know, well, the grain is a seed and you plant the seed and of course it grows, right? And you get more grain. But remember, you have to give some of that seed up, first of all, and not eat it yourself. And then you have to commit to the work of tending those plants and helping them to grow, processing that seed, sharing it with your community, and repeating the cycle over and over again. So with the mandrake, it seems magical, it seems almost mysterious or difficult to approach. With the grain, maybe it seems a little more familiar, but we're both talking in these stories, both of the cases, we're talking about a gift cycle. And I really maintain this is the way nature works. This is the way I found herbal medicine works. This is the way I found healing experiences with my clients work. A need, a gift, the commitment, the hard work, and the reward, and then the communion and the sharing back. So these stories that we tell as herbalists, I love them. They ground me, they give me a sense of place, a sense of purpose, and a meaning to my daily life. And they're incredibly valuable, if only for that, if only for the fact that they give us connection and space and place. Now I want to kind of move from the field of grain out further, out way further. Because when we're talking about meaning and place and a feeling of being held and being connected, we live in a universe that is unfathomably vast. And we feel so small when we look up at the night sky. We feel so alone sometimes. And at the same time, these stories can give us that grounding and that centering that we need to be able to put one foot in front of the other and engage in the work, the activism, the healing that we as herbalists need to bring to the world and bring to the culture. Space is wide open and it's pretty much empty. Not quite empty though. There's just a very little bit of heat that is scattered throughout the empty space of the universe. Very, very rare hydrogen atoms that are scattered across the empty space of the universe. And then there are these islands, these places where matter and energy coalesce into galaxies, into solar systems, into planets, into places where we see the opposite of emptiness. And the old cosmologies, right? And this is what we're talking about. Our stories in herbal medicine are cosmologies. They're stories that root us and ground us in the vastness of the universe and help explain our experience in the vastness of the universe, right? The ancient cosmologies really talk about our universe itself being one profound gift cycle, one profound love story of energy and matter reuniting and coming back to a place of rest and a place of peace. We see this love story not just in the universe writ large, but we see it also on smaller scales, right? Where the sun every day sends vast amounts of energy to our biosphere, to our planet, as a daily act of love that is renewed every single day. And the earth receives this gift, right? And it takes it and it passes it on. It dissipates it. It keeps moving the energy of the sun through further cycles, right? That's really what I want to talk about today. So whether it's writ large at the level of the universe, medium scale, like our solar system, that incredible being centered around the sun with these planets that circle around it in this endless dance, or whether it's way minuscule in our gardens, right? We see these patterns and these cycles and these love stories and these processes of gifting energy and spirit and moving it through what we perceive as life, what we perceive as the universe, what we perceive as reality. We call these our, daily cycles of night and day, our seasonal cycles of renewal, where we look forward to the sprouting of seeds every spring. We plant those seeds as gifts. We receive the gifts of the calendula flowers in July when they're ready and they're vibrant and covered in resin. And we make them into our salve that we give to our friends that heals our skin. All of these cycles, light to dark and back to light again, winter into spring, into summer and fall and winter again, cycles of moisture back to dryness, back to moisture, of heat to cold and back to heat again. There are cycles that alternate between these polarities, between these two oscillating extremes. We see it with light, we see it with moisture, we see it with temperature. We see it as the earth moves around the sun. We see it in the cycles of the sun itself. And of course, writ large, we see it on the universe as, you know, if you subscribe to the theories of modern physics, as this sort of explosion from this one concentrated place into everything we see in the universe today is actually trying to reconnect itself again in this big, vast sort of love story of matter reconnecting to energy and spreading out across the universe we see. So herbalists tell us this, but really all sort of indigenous systems tell us this, that our universe, that our solar system, that our biosphere, that our communities, that us as individuals, that our organ systems alternate and fluctuate between polarities. And that, as the Taoists say, you know, first there was nothing, then there was one. And then when there was two, two begot three, and three begot the 10,000 things. And the way that those 10,000 things form is through this gift-giving cycle between those first two movers. Call them light and darkness, call them presence and non-presence, call them this coalition of matter and energy and this emptiness of space to receive it. But this flux and flow between these polarities is a gift from one to the other, a love story that is told over billions of years, and that we, every single day, get to be a part of. Because of course, within this big polarity, there are polarities that are nested one inside the other, one inside the other. Now, I'm really an avid student of physics and of cosmology from the sort of scientific perspective. And the insights I think that have come through the 20th century and now in the 21st century are amazing, right? They're amazing what these physicists are telling us about the fabric of reality and the nature of reality. And it's so close to the mystical traditions of indigenous mind that I really have incredible hope that we're going to come right back around to those original cosmologies that drive herbal medicine across the entire planet. But one of the central tenets of physics, right, and you probably have heard this, is something that at face value might seem a little bit depressing. It's this idea that we're all dissolving into this sort of homogeneous soup where everything will be undifferentiated, where there will be nothing that stands out, and that the second law of thermodynamics, or entropy, dictates that inevitably we're going to go from an ordered state to a disordered state, and everything is going to kind of go to bland homogeneity with nothing unique. And this seems a little bit depressing, but I'll tell you one thing. First of all, it's billions and billions of years away, if it even is going to happen at all. But the other really amazing thing is that this process of everything going to hell, so to speak, or everything going to this bland homogeneity in the end, is actually the love story of the universe. And it's the ultimate moment of rest and peace that the universe is moving towards. The question I often get is, well, if everything is going to disorder, how is it that over the billions of years of sort of evolutionary history in the universe, things are actually getting more complex and more beautiful, and life is expanding into greater diversity and greater wisdom and greater complexity? How the heck is it that we can have something that seeks to smooth and blunt all of the sharp edges and make everything even and homogeneous, and at the same time we have this rising up of diversity, of complexity, of beauty, and all the flowers we see, all the mushrooms we see, all the incredible people we see in this world? How is it, if entropy is the ultimate story of the universe, that we have this incredible complexity at the same time? They seem incompatible. Well, I think some of the most exciting research that I've been able to get into over the last 5 to 10 years really brings home what's happening and how we can have both at the same time, even though they seem like they're irreconcilably different. Let me talk to you just briefly about this a little bit, and then I promise we'll get right back into plants. What a lot of researchers are finding is that the complexity we see in the world you can start to have these very simple models, and you can actually take a pretty close look at it. And you can see how complexity comes to be from a system that is not complex, okay? So here on the left, we have particles in a colloid. They're suspended in sort of a gel, almost like an aloe gel. And these particles are sitting in there and they're just hanging out. Over here on the right, we start to see bonds form between those particles. And the bonds start to create these tinker toy-like structures. And this has actually been observed. Under what conditions do these structures begin to form? Well, they form if you start to apply a little bit of gentle energy to this soup of particles inside the gel. Meaning, if you just give it a little tap, gentle tap, right? Every once in a while, that mechanical energy that sends ripples and waves through the colloid stimulates those particles to connect with each other. And over time, they connect into greater, more complex, more diverse structures. And that in and of itself, I think, is pretty amazing. When you apply energy to a system, the components of that system begin to arrange themselves into more and more complex structures. That in and of itself, I think, is an incredible observation. But because the system is small enough, you can do another really interesting thing by observing it. And that is, you can measure how much energy you're putting in, like how much power does it take to give those little taps, right? And how quickly is that energy leaving the system on the other side? How quickly is that energy being dissipated? And of course, this is what entropy wants, right? Entropy wants energy to be dissipated quickly. If you've got a fire, if you've got a heat source, entropy demands that that heat source be dissipated and spread out over the air. So you go from this concentrated fire down to like a room that's warm, right? But not nearly as warm as the point source right there where the log is burning. And over time, you've got these high energy pieces of wood that get turned into low energy CO2 and ash and low energy heat that is spread out homogeneously over your entire house. That's what entropy wants. So the faster a system can dissipate energy, the better job it's doing achieving the goals of entropy. And this is what ultimately blew my mind, you all. These systems inside the gel arrange themselves into more diverse and complex structures when you apply energy to them. And they also dissipate that energy more quickly and more effectively. What this really means is that complexity and diversity arise in order to dissipate energy more effectively. The complexity, diversity, and beauty of life that we see is not in opposition to the entropic force that's trying to smooth everything out. It's actually a partner to it and is helping it work better and more effectively. A lot of the research that I'm talking about, it is named as sort of dissipation-driven adaptation. This idea that systems and structures adapt and become more complex when energy is moved through them in order to be able to dissipate that energy more quickly and more effectively. And a lot of this research is coming out of a lab at MIT that is headed up by Jeremy England. And I don't expect, I'm not going to go through the details of this paper, but it's a really fascinating paper. And let me just kind of explain what you're seeing here. This little orange particle is one of many particles that live inside this sort of soup, okay? And at baseline, when they're just hanging out, they sort of bond with each other in these generic ways. New bonds form, old ones go away. Nothing really changes or becomes too complex or organized. But once you start oscillating this one particle, once you start shaking just that one particle a little bit and providing energy to that one particle, it begins to bond into structures with its neighbors that do two things. One, they become stable. These structures, whether it's the top one, the middle one, or the bottom one, become stable once they form. And the second thing that happens is that little orange particle that's getting shaken all by itself is able to transfer the energy that is being put on it to its neighbors and to the system more quickly and more effectively than it would otherwise. And that's all that this graph really means, right? This other trough down here that happens after you start shaking that little orange particle is a system that has a lower level of embodied energy that is more effectively distributing the energy that is applied to the system. So what does this mean? When you apply energy to this one particle in this chemical space inside this gel, it is able to dissipate that energy more effectively if it creates stable, complex structures with its neighbors. And that working together, it is able to transfer that energy more effectively and more efficiently outside of itself and to its neighbors. And as a result, the complex community becomes more resilient and more stable and starts to resonate, starts to have an actual structure of its own. Whereas before, when you weren't applying energy to this soup, everyone was just kind of hanging out homogeneously and structuring and then destructuring. Nothing was really stable. And what are we, you all, and what is our planet, except a stable, resonant structure that exists in space and time? The point is that stable, resonant structure would never exist in space and time if we didn't have this massive story writ large in the universe of the universe trying to get back to this state of total homogeneity, of entropy driving, right, this ongoing process of moving and dissipating energy. And of course, that's what systems do. And what we realize now, that's what they're built to do. And the more complex and diverse and wonderful they get, the better they dissipate energy, and the more complex and diverse and wonderful they get. Now, we might have a sort of intuitive grasp of this. We might have a sort of intellectual grasp of this. Some of you might understand the physics of dissipative systems in complex solutions, or be interested in reading this paper. Some of you might not, and I totally don't blame you. But let me go to an analogy that maybe is a little closer to home. Think about a radiator. Why are radiators shaped the way they are? If you had one giant cast iron block and you put hot water in it, it would distribute that heat into your room less effectively than if you have a complex folded radiator structure. That's why we make radiators. It's in order to dissipate heat more quickly and more effectively. And we make them complex, whether it's the radiator grill of a car, right, that's trying to dissipate the heat of the engine, or whether it's the radiator in your room that's trying to warm up your house more quickly and more effectively from the hot water that's pumped through its pipes. If you make the surface have greater points of contact, in this case with the air, they're able to take that heat source and dissipate it to the air more effectively if that surface is more folded, if that surface is more complex, if there's more points of contact. If it were just a linear tube, it wouldn't dissipate the heat as well as the folded complex structure of a radiator. So hopefully that makes a little more sense, right? Because again, it tells us that the way systems work is they're trying hard to dissipate the energy that's moving through the world. And to do that more effectively, they have to create more and more complex, more diverse, more folded, more twisted, more beautifully lacy structures in order to really participate effectively in that great love story of the universe and matter and energy trying to find each other again from the moment they got separated and that plasma of the Big Bang exploded across the starry sky. And of course, you see this everywhere. The interface between water and land is complex, it's folded, it's lacy, it's fractal. And we don't just see it in the network between land and water. This is how nature works, you all. It becomes more and more folded, more and more complex. To use a term mathematicians use, it becomes more fractal. And those fractal patterns are self-similar, meaning from the universe writ large down to our bodies, our cells, even down to atomic nuclei. We see the same complex patterns, right? Whether it's in our neurons, whether it's in our GI tracts, whether it's in branching trees or coral, the branching vein patterns of leaves, even bubbles that form in the foam on the surface of the sea. And there's a really good reason for this. It's because the more folded, the more complex, the more fractal your system is, the better able it is to take energy and dissipate it through. Essentially, if you have a system that is not complex, it can handle a certain amount of energy, right? Before it overheats and breaks if you start putting more energy into it. But nature doesn't do that. It gives every system the energy it can handle. If you essentially want to increase the voltage in a system, right? You want to increase its vitality. You want to let more energy flow through it so that system can accomplish more things. You have to increase its complexity, because that's the way the system can dissipate more of that energy more quickly. If you don't increase its complexity and try to put more energy into it, it will overheat and you will damage the system. So that's what we as herbalists do, right? We really try and increase the diversity of experience. And when we talk about that, we're increasing the diversity of chemical experience that the human physiology has at its disposal by providing the phytochemistry, these wild plants and their compounds, to the human being, so that the human being can essentially increase its voltage, take in more energy from the biosphere, be able to handle more flux. And we call that vitality. The vitalists know all about this, right? And vitalists have been poo-pooed in the scientific world, ever since the 19th century, and folks tried to capture the élan vital, or the vital force. And clearly you can't capture the vital force, right? You might as well try and catch the wind. But what you can do is you can observe how vitality increases when you increase the diversity of exposure and the complexity of a system. And a little bit of a preview here. The way you do that is you go all in the gift cycle. Because when you open yourself to the voice that that mandrake has at your feet, when you're transfixed by the oak and the mistletoe, when you open yourself up to that mandrake, you begin to engage in this cycle that ultimately increases your complexity, improves your ability to take in energy from the world and dissipate it outward, and makes you feel more vital. This is the way nature works. And it's really heartening to me that physics is describing this in detail using mathematical equations that sort of underpin with a very grounded set of observations what I think indigenous minds and traditional healing systems and the hearts of herbalists have known for a very, very long time. Now, in our physiology, we see this as well, right? Our physiology is incredibly complex. It's born of millions, billions of years of dance, of this love story moving through the biosphere on planet Earth and increasing the complexity and diversity of the biosphere on planet Earth. But even inside us, we see incredible diversity and complexity. We see the ability of our DNA to tune into signals not only from inside our bodies, but from other humans, from other animals, from plants, from fungi, from the biosphere, where there are specialized proteins whose only purpose really is to listen to signals coming from outside of our body and change the way we create our body on a moment-to-moment basis. We've got receptors on the surface of our cells that aren't only sensitive to hormones and neurotransmitters that we make, but are sensitive to compounds from the world around us too. We have all sorts of connections between our nerve and muscle that respond to our own internal environment, but also to the conversations we have with our friends, the walks we take in the forest, the work we do in our gardens, the space we walk in our urban environments, and alter their firing patterns and their behavior in response. And we've got an incredibly sophisticated immune system that speaks in a language of sugar and protein chains that is sampling and tasting and feeling the world around itself all the time and adjusting, fine-tuning us so that we can participate in the complex dance of the biosphere. Essentially, what we have in our physiology are bazillions of points of contact with this complex ecology fractal that lives all around us and interpenetrates us. Because of course, we, as part of the biosphere on planet Earth, are receiving the gifts of the sun, right? The sort of energy hub of our solar system, of this grand being in which we live. We're receiving them on a daily basis, moving them through us, right? And we hope moving it out into the world and stewarding it. So what I like to talk about in terms of herbal medicine is that we don't really have very well-defined edges. It might look like we end at our skin, but of course that's not true. Many, many compounds just permeate right through our skin. We breathe compounds in through our lungs. We take them in through our mouth. We take them in through the soles of our feet. But also, the ecology itself is providing these compounds as part of a really complex dance that ultimately is there to dissipate the energy of the sun more effectively. And we are crucial players in this, right? We're crucial players. And we have two choices ahead of us. We can wall ourselves off from the flow of energy, trying to better define our edges and our boundaries, or we can go all in on the gifts of nature, take them in and increase our voltage, right? And as a result, increase our vitality. And especially tonic herbalism, I think that's what it's all about, right? We've got some really powerful plants that can have drug-like effects in the human body, and that's fantastic. That's fine and good. But we also have our tonics. And what our tonics do is they speak to these points of contact that are attuned to the chemistry that tonics provide, that are essentially ancestral memory living inside of us, of all the humans, of all the pre-human animals, of all the bacteria, the plants themselves, the pre-cellular biosphere of planet Earth. All those ancestral memories are encoded inside us and waiting for the signals that come into us from the world outside. So the ecological fractal, this complex, diverse world that is increasing in complexity every moment and that is self-organizing to be able to better take the energy of the sun and move it through the biosphere at high voltage with high vitality, it wants us on board. And our ancestors, whose memory is encoded inside of us, in our genes, in our gene receptors, in our cell surface receptors, in our immune system and the way it handles the world, they're sitting in there watching and hoping that we will continue to participate in this dance. Now, one of the things that I think this understanding can provide, and whether it's the story of John Barleycorn or it's the story of the mandrake, right, is that these stories and this understanding that we're embedded in this complex, conscious, ecological fractal gives us a great sense of sort of purpose and understanding, but it also gives us an incredible sense of meaning. And to me, connection with the world around us. There's some practical great tools, right? Increase vitality by increasing complexity. But there also is an incredible sense of meaning, a feeling of being held that comes when we engage with these cosmologies, right? When we engage with this understanding of how the cosmos works. And I want to call your attention to the work of Marion Woodman. She was a Canadian Jungian psychoanalyst and dream worker who really deeply delved into, I think, the threads that move through culture, some of the unhealthy threads, some of the uplifting threads, some of the repressed threads in our psyche, speaking about them from a dream work perspective. And what Marion Woodman talked about was how untethered we are right now from that primeval love story of sort of matter and energy reuniting, right? Or trying to reunite. And how disconnected we are from the source, whom she calls the mother or mater. And how, in an attempt to get back to that source, we've replaced the mother with matter. So instead of mater, the Latin word for mother, we have matter or stuff. And this is a really fascinating idea, right? Because when we feel empty, when we feel disconnected, when we feel lost in the vastness of the cosmos because we don't have that cosmology, that shared mythos to hold us, right? As Westerners, we've often turned to stuff. And Marion Woodman's point, which of course we all intuitively understand, is that stuff will never fill that void. Stuff will never fill that gap. It will never fill it for us. But what systems thinkers and physicists are able to tell us now is that by hoarding stuff, you're actually doing the exact opposite of what all living systems are trying to do. And as a result, trying to achieve greater vitality, by hoarding stuff is a fool's errand and will never, ever work. Because all you do when you hoard stuff is you interrupt that flow. The way to abundance, the way to growth, the way to increased vitality is not more food, for instance. It's a wider diversity and array of food, including a range of somewhat bitter and somewhat challenging medicinal plants that we normally wouldn't put to the cookie jar and we normally wouldn't want to eat after dinner. But the point is that if we engage with the complex diversity of food, including the wild phytonutrients that come in plants that we call medicinal plants, right? We will get a level of vitality that simple food by itself, simple carbohydrates, proteins, and fat will never be able to provide. But if you look at what the nutrition world and what our sort of dietary culture in the Western world might try to tell us today, it's that happiness and vitality come from eating more protein, fats, and carbs, not by eating less and more diverse sources of food, but just by having more of it. And what Marion Woodman articulates well, and what systems thinkers and physicists who believe in and understand these complex dissipative systems, is that the way to greater vitality and abundance and growth is not simply through accumulation. It's through increased diversity and greater voltage, greater speed and of flow, and greater amounts of matter and energy not being hoarded, but moving through the system, right? Of course, if you think all living systems and you take a look at them, this is what you see, right? You see matter and energy fluxing through systems, like a wetland or a piece of your lawn, or even a lemon balm on your windowsill. Matter and energy from sunlight to water to soil are moving through that system, providing abundance and vitality to the lemon balm plant in that pot on the windowsill. And that lemon balm plant grows and becomes more vital and more vibrant. Imagine if lemon balm decided that it wanted to just hoard the sunlight, or it wanted to hoard all the water. All you get there is stagnation. And stagnation for that lemon balm plant is the enemy. It's the opposite of vitality, right? So movement and flow are the key, not accumulation. And what any indigenous person knows is that if you try and hoard anything and keep it for yourself, first of all, it's impossible to do, because anything you keep becomes a deficit somewhere else in the living system. And because we're all connected, anything you keep from your brother, anything you keep from your sister, right, ends up hurting them, decreasing the diversity of the system, and ultimately hampering the flow of energy to you. Because matter and energy are conserved in the universe, it is impossible to actually hoard it. Any temporary inequity in distribution is an illusion and ultimately harms the system. And so what we're seeing, for example, today, in terms of inequities in wealth, in terms of the racial inequities, in terms of how climate change affects people, disproportionately overwhelming minority communities, indigenous communities, communities of people of color. These are the consequences of hoarding wealth and energy, right? So what the indigenous world tells us, what modern physics tells us, what anyone who observes a wetland or a lemon balm on a windowsill tells us, hoarding stuff is not the route to abundance. It may temporarily give you illusory abundance in a piece of a living system, but in the end, all it does is shut that piece off from the rest of the ecology and decrease the gifts that it has available to itself. What truly is the route to abundance is to let all that business flow out of you and into the wider fractal ecology around us. When you do this, and when you increase the diversity of inputs into your physiology, the voltage all of a sudden goes up and more matter and energy begin to flow through you and out of you into the wider ecology. And as a result, your vitality increases. You're able to do more, you're able to feel more vital, and you're able to ultimately turn on more people, make bigger gardens, and support the cosmic love story of matter and energy trying to reunite, which they've been trying to do for, if you believe the physicists, 14 billion years since the moment of the Big Bang. Let's help them. In so doing, we become more complex, we become more vital, we become more engaged. And that's how all of nature works. It becomes more fractal, more complex, more vital, and more engaged. And believe me, it wants us along for the ride, right? So I ultimately think, and this framework comes from the study that have come from a lot of different sources, but I really want to specifically call out a couple of folks to you in case you want to read more. The first is the work of an incredible panpsychist philosopher. Her name is Freya Matthews. She's Australian. And she wrote a range of books. One of my favorites is In Defense of Matter. And she talks about how consciousness is universal. And it's a perspective that's called a panpsychist perspective. Not that necessarily every rock and tree has a spirit living in it, although that's the perspective I personally like to take, but more that from the moment of the Big Bang, the universe has had consciousness and longing and desire and drive built into it from the very beginning. That consciousness isn't an emergent property that comes when matter gets sufficiently complex. It's really a hard argument to make, because if that's true, where does it come from? Where does our experience all of a sudden become conscious if it wasn't before? Very, very tricky argument to try and untangle. It's called the hard problem of consciousness. But if it's baked in from the very beginning, right? If matter was holding energy and all of a sudden they moved apart and they look at each other across the chasm of the universe and say, I love you, let's get back together. And in the process of doing so, engage in this burst of complexity that self-organizing systems do as matter and energy attempt to equalize this sort of gradient that exists between them, right? Then this consciousness that is everywhere that we feel inside of us is actually a sliver, a shard, a piece of this massive universal love story consciousness of the universe trying to reconnect with itself and making an incredible complex dissipative radiator in order to be able to get there more quickly. The side effect is, wow, is that radiator beautiful? And aren't we so lucky to be a part of it today? What Freya Matthews talks about, and I really take to heart, is that this isn't just a philosophy or a way of looking at the world. There's actually really practical things we can do to make all of this easier. And the consequences of it are, we're going to feel more vital. We're going to feel more engaged. And isn't this all what herbal medicine teaches us? This is stuff you're going to learn about this whole weekend. When you learn about sort of walking on trails, when you learn about what the spices in your kitchen can do, when you learn how to identify the weeds that grow around your backyard, like Rosemary was telling us earlier, when you learn about how to engage with the immune system, how to engage with the nervous system and our moods, all of these things are coming from this perspective, right? That the universe and the world around us is there to hold us up, and that if we increase the inputs and we pay attention to what's going on, there's practical ways to make our life more efficient, make us more vital. And isn't this what we call wellness? That's why I appreciate Freya Matthews' work. And one of the key components that she brings, right, is that we, at least for a couple of 100 years, have been very keen on knowledge of the natural world. We want to know what's going on. We want to explain it. We want to dissect it. We want to check it out and get at the innards and figure it out. And this is a very real impetus. But Dr. Matthews tells us knowledge is not nearly as powerful, not nearly as important as encounter is. And encounter, right, is born of what she calls eros, this sort of erotic, deeply connected, wild, loving, but totally irrational drive to engage and enmesh ourselves with the world around us, to hold it, to eat it, to slime it all over our faces, to just erotically engage with the world. Knowledge is born of psyche, this idea that we want to observe it, take it into our mind, turn it around, get an understanding, but not necessarily commune and merge with it the way Eros would ask us to do. Psyche is much colder, and she gives us knowledge, but she doesn't give us encounter. And so as we move through the world, as we attempt to be good herbalists, good stewards of nature, good stewards of culture, good stewards of humanity, let us think about the primacy of encounter versus knowledge, right? And how important encounter is in the drive to sort of keep the world healthy and keep ourselves healthy too. The other piece that I think might be interesting and fun for you to check in is this really cool book that was written for artists who receive inspiration from nature, right? That first gift. And it's a book called The Gift by by Lewis Hyde. And I really appreciate his work. And I think you might find it lovely and engaging too, if you get a chance to take a look at it. He talks about this gift cycle a lot, and the combination of sort of modern panpsychist understanding, modern understanding that physics gives us about dissipative systems, and this sort of artistic understanding of inspiration and then hard work, right? All come together, I think, to explain what herbal medicine does so well, which is to connect human beings and gardens and communities to the gifts of nature that come to us in the form of plants and mushrooms. And in so doing, increase the vitality of the herbalist, increase the vitality of the person taking it, and increase the vitality of the community, the culture, the ecology, and ultimately this biosphere that is drinking in sunlight every single day and dissipating it outward into space. So there's 4 key pieces to the gift cycle, okay? The first is initiation. What the guy experienced when he saw the mistletoe in the oak tree and just was transfixed there in the forest. And then the mandrake root came to him. That's the second part. You have to open yourself up once you've been initiated, right? Once you've had this experience, which we've all had, that first gift, right? Where we're like, holy moly, what was that? I felt like I was beyond me. I was part of something bigger for a moment there. For a moment, I felt immortal and connected to the biosphere, connected to a consciousness that is far beyond my own, right? Then we open up and we say, wow, if this can happen once, is it happening all the time? The answer is yes, it is, right? So the next part is we really have to open ourselves up so that we can receive more of those gifts, more of that energy, and to learn what it is that nourishes us specifically as our own beautiful incarnation, our own beautiful subset of this sort of massive, conscious, fractal flow that is happening in the world around us. Then comes the hard part. Then comes the work. Then comes the realization that we have to bring the bread and the meat to the mandrake every single day for the rest of our lives. And if we don't do that, we'll be killed. And we may not be killed, but we'll slowly be diminished. We'll slowly see our vitality reduce. If we receive a gift, we become open to it, but then we don't commit to the hard work of engaging with what the gift has given us. So for those of us who are called to this conference this weekend and have felt that calling and are here and are open, right? I encourage you to really think about what that work might look like for you and what you're willing to commit to, because there will be a strong commitment and a lot of work. I never said that being vital and being well was something that we just did by sitting on the couch and lounging. To the contrary, it's the opposite. But hopefully, like any artist who has been inspired and has spent countless sort of sleepless nights burning the midnight oil and putting together their incredible artwork, knows it's work, but it's work that really is worth it, because it breeds what? This great sense of gratitude and this idea that we have to share that work out with our community, with our partners, with our friends, with the culture, with the ecology, right? And that's ultimately what the great gift cycle is. We become so filled by the work that we do that we are able to then dissipate it outward. We have so much vitality by having engaged with the wild, complex diversity of nature that we are able to then turn it back out into the world and increase the vitality and complexity and diversity of the world in turn. And then, of course, when we realize this, the cycle begins anew. And a new inspiration, period of opening, and period of work repeats itself. And this is happening inside every atom that makes up every molecule, that makes up every strand of DNA in our cells every cell in our bodies, every tissue, our bodies, our families, our communities, all the way to the solar system, all the way to the galaxy. This cycle of dissipation is a gift cycle. And it starts with that ultimate gift, that attempt, that gift that's going to take, 32 billion years to actually give, that started 13 billion years ago and that we're a part of right now. So one of the things that we see from this gift cycle, right, is that it stands in stark contrast to some of the more exploitative and more accumulation-based strategies for wellness and health that have dominated at least Western culture for the last couple hundred years. The story has gone, if we can just keep accumulating wealth, then that wealth will go to everybody, everyone's going to be happy, right? And we'll just keep growing and growing and growing our stuff. We'll keep replacing any feeling of emptiness that we might have with more stuff, right? And that mater, the mother that Marion Woodman talks about, she won't matter too much to us anymore because we'll be so big and so grown and we'll have so many things that we'll be able to keep accumulating and accumulating and accumulating. Will be great. Now, of course, we've seen, and things have really come to a head in the last few months, and mostly in the last few weeks, that this is a failed strategy. That we are A, inextricably tied to every corner of the biosphere. No one escapes the virus. And B, that any accumulation in wealth or in prosperity or in privilege that one part of the biosphere might enjoy comes without any escape at the detriment and at the feet of the oppression of another segment. And we're seeing it in terms of Black lives in the United States today, but we're seeing it writ large in terms of the effects of climate change on global indigenous populations, on the keepers and stewards of our true traditions, of this wisdom that I'm barely scratching the surface of and barely trying to understand, but have been flowing through indigenous minds and these sort of traditional healing systems that inform our herbal medicine. So I'm here to tell you, right? The gift cycle tells us that yield and increase does not come through accumulation of stuff. Yield comes and increases in abundance and wellness come through increased complexity and diversity of living systems, which happens sort of automatically when that system engages with the wild diversity of nature around it. By building biodiversity and by building relationship, we enhance the efficiency of the system. Think about ball bearings in a wheel, how they minimize points of contact in that wheel and make it so that wheel is more efficient at dissipating the energy that the engine gives it to drive the movement of the car, for example, or drive movement of the motor. If you can increase points of contact, you make the system more efficient. That energy that comes through the system goes further, gives more wellness, because you're not struggling against the inefficiency of a non-diverse system that has attempted to wall itself off and segregate stuff inside of it, okay? When you buy into this and you let matter and energy flow through you and you increase vitality and efficiency, you start to see self-amplifying, self-assembling synergies start to develop. And this is something we've all experienced when we've engaged with the art and science of herbal medicine, right? Synchronicities start to happen. Self-assembling relationships start to build. And that breeds even more vitality. So the route to wellness, to abundance, to vitality, to what we want, right, is not through the accumulation of stuff. It's through greater diversity and complexity and to allowing all of that stuff, that matter and energy to flow through us with a gift cycle. What's crucial is that it requires ongoing attention and ongoing work. And Indigenous people know and understand this, right? This is a little picture of an offering that is put out on thresholds, next to important tools, on cars, and at temples in the animist culture of Bali, Indonesia, where the sort of panpsychist idea that there's consciousness everywhere and there's spirits in every tree and every tool and every doorstep lives very vibrantly to this day. And so every day, realizing that this is the case, the people of Bali make offerings and bring them in gratitude and thanks to the spirits of place and tool and car and everything. Every day, through the ceremonies that we know and that are encoded in folklore and fairy tale and story, we see the exhortation, the urging from our indigenous cultures and from the natural world to tend the conscious ecology fractal, right? To engage with the consciousness that is all around us, make it more diverse and complex, and bring our offerings and our work to it in a mindful way every single day. It takes work, but wow, it's the best work because ultimately it leaves us more full. Very, very different from the work of accumulating capital that leaves us full of stuff, but never actually full. And these are the lessons of herbal medicine, that the tonics that our plants and mushrooms offer to us are the root to the mater, and that we take them as gifts, we give them back as gifts, and we do this hard work of engaging in gratitude and work with them on a daily basis. If we do this, I'll tell you, this holds some very practical and real secrets to how we can achieve wellness today and heal not only people, but some of the rifts and deep injuries that our culture has perpetrated on itself and on the planet. So I'd like to end by just briefly going through not necessarily plants that are going to catalyze this gift cycle, because this is something that is different for everyone, but plants that I have personally found useful to have along for different phases of this gift cycle, okay? So the first is plants that are part of sort of initiation. Plants that can literally grab us by the spirit and say, hey, you're part of this incredible conscious flow that is all around you. Did you not see this? And give us that experience of initiation. Now, on their own, they're not enough, because an experience of initiation is empty unless we then say, holy cow, I need to open myself up to more of this flow, right? But it can be an incredibly powerful tool to help catalyze change, especially in individuals who may not be flexible enough or in the right space to be able to engage with the crazy complexity of the flow of life and love in the universe around us. And one of the first and one of my favorites is rue, Ruta graveolens, and that's what this plant is. Also called the herb of grace. She holds a special place in a lot of indigenous cultures around the world, including in Italy, where she is considered to be a stimulant and a magical plant that sort of wakes us up and carries us, particularly through full moon nights, to have these incredibly deep experiences. Now, rue is a strong plant, and with any of these initiatory herbs, if you're unfamiliar with them, I exhort you to hang out with an herbalist who can help you get to know them better before you actually put them into your body or bring them into your garden. But rue is one of the first, a gateway opener and a protectress too for all of us, right? And can grow in a lot of different places. The next one is a plant that I've been lucky enough to have growing in many different incarnations for the last 2 decades with me. And she is called the diviner sage, or Salvia divinorum. And the leaf of the diviner sage is a leaf that is chewed traditionally by indigenous peoples of Central and South America, around the fire, usually at night. And she has an incredibly strong and sometimes harsh but powerful voice. And she is part of a group of plants and mushrooms that we would call the entheogens, or the psychedelics. They burst open our psyche, right? And take the cold psyche and just split her open so that she can see the wonder of Eros. And at the same time, entheogenic, they engender the divine within. This is another incredible initiatory plant, but again, I exhort you to find herbalists who know how to work with this plant, who maybe have ancestral traditions that connect them to this plant, to be able to truly get a deep sense of the gifts that she can offer as part of an initiatory experience for you. Another plant that I've gotten to know from both my days in Italy and then throughout the American Southwest and Central America is Datura. And many of the nightshade plants, from mandrake to datura and belladonna and onward, also have a very powerful voice and real strength at bringing us initiatory experiences that can bust open our psyche and help us tune into the power of Eros and the power of encounter over knowledge. But this is also potentially a dark medicine with some very intense lessons to teach us. So one more time, I exhort you to find an herbalist who has experience with this plant and how to use it safely and properly to be able to connect with her as an initiatory plant for your own experience. Mandrake, of course, I won't talk about again, but she's another one from the European tradition that, you know, from the story of that man who lived way back when, walked through the forest to find the mandrake, to, you know, Harry Potter and the initiatory experiences that you see in those books, right, that provide meaning and context and magic to the people who engage with them. Mandrake is another that, again, needs to be approached with a lot of respect, but can have some powerful initiatory potency for us. I want to turn your attention to the artemisias as well, right? And these are plants that have silvery undersides to their leaves. This plant here is wild wormwood on the Sicilian coast, and she grows powerful and bitter there in the dry and hot soil. But mugwort, which grows almost everywhere, is fantastic too, as well as some of the cultivated artemisias like Sweet Annie. They can be burned, and this includes sagebrush, right, in the American Southwest. They can be smoked even in some traditions. They can be taken internally as dilute teas, and they have a long history of being used as dream-enhancing herbs and shifters of consciousness, and they're particularly connected to the moonlight. A little bit safer than some of the other plants that I've brought forth, including rue or ruta, but still, powerful, bitter, not to be used, for example, in pregnancy or in certain circumstances. So also important to connect with an herbalist to work with this plant safely. So once we get through, you know, some of these initiatory experience plants, and I just want to leave one last shout out to tobacco, right? And this is Nicotiana rustica, a plant that I like to grow and that is a classic initiatory plant of this sort of part of the world, and that really initiated a vast swath of European culture, right, when it was discovered. Unfortunately, the Europeans took the initiatory power of tobacco, and rather than using it as a trigger to open up, right, they stuck with it by itself and just continued to accumulate the plant for the sake of just repeating these initiatory experiences. And let that be a warning, right? These plants aren't here to kind of give us these powerful revelatory experiences every moment of every day. They're here to help bust open our psyche, and then we have to do this work, right, that goes in other directions too. And the example of what happened to tobacco, I think, is one that should say, hey, big caution road sign when approaching these initiatory plants. But they're so helpful and important for catalyzing change that I think it's essential for us to recognize that they've always been a part of the herbal tradition, and they've been in our toolkit to catalyze these experiences. It's just that usually we do it with kids, right? Or we do it with people at peak moments and times in their life when they need guidance or connection or reconnection to that conscious ecology fractal. The next step is to engage with the opening. And I found some really amazing plants can help with this a lot. If you're feeling awakened by what has happened over the last month, but you're also feeling scared and unsure and uncertain, these opening plants are what can help you move forward after that initiatory experience and begin to gather knowledge, gather encounter, and understand a little bit more of what it is you're stepping into. And by coincidence, maybe, they also are all incredible cardiovascular tonics. Because of course, it may be the case that one of the consequences of hoarding stuff, one of the consequences of disconnecting from mater, from the source, is that our hearts suffer, and that our ability to be open in our cardiovascular system, which is essential for blood flow and for heart health and for cardiovascular health, turns in from a flexible and engaged picture to a hardened and stiffened picture. And so many of these herbs that I found really good for sort of opening us up and keeping us open and flowing to this flow of vitality and eros through life are also amazing cardiovascular tonics that open up the cardiovascular system too. And I start with yarrow, one of my most favorite and honored herbs, because yarrow doesn't just open up the pores in a fever. It doesn't just open up peripheral circulation and help with feelings of warmth and with hypertension. It also opens up our dreams. It opens up our ability to see the future and understand how the conscious ecology fractal is evolving and moving into its next phase. Always been associated with clairvoyance, yarrow has. And it does so by also strengthening our boundaries and helping us move safely in this open way forward. So whether it's with a flower essence or with a tincture or with a little bit of tea, I strongly encourage you to get to know yarrow because it helps us hold visions of the future in an open way and also a protected and safe way. Really amazing plant. Linden is another one of those plants. And, you know, the gift of linden, Karis, it's just really appropriate that your name is that, because linden is an incredible gift. And it's an aromatic gift that gives us the gift of scent right away, but it also, like yarrow, works to keep us open to the possibilities that the natural world has to offer us. And it makes a luscious and delicious infusion, which can be taken as a bath or it can be taken as a cup of tea. Steep yourself in the tea if you want, or drink it internally, or better yet, do both, right? And what linden can do for us as we're moving forward and trying to be open and experiencing what it is to be open to the wild diversity of the world and to the good and the bad and everything that flows through it, is it gives us soothing and it gives us luxurious love. And that's really what I love most about this plant. It's my go-to tea at the end of a stressful day, or when the time comes to take the work hat off and sit down with my kid and read some stories or walk through the garden together. Linden helps with that transition, while also at the same time keeping us open rather than suppressing feelings of stress or anxiety or tension that come from engaging with the world, right? Because that's what the initiatory experience is asking us to do. It's asking us to engage with the world, and linden can really make it so much more delicious to do so. This is the flower of a sage called Salvia milthiorrhiza, or Chinese red root sage. And the long story short with this plant medicinally is that you can think of it like hawthorn berry from traditional Chinese medicine. It's a cardiovascular tonic that's flavonoid rich. It has a deep red root that kind of looks like the circulation around the heart. And it is fantastic at opening not only the cardiovascular system, but also the emotional heart. And at first, sometimes when people who have been hunkered down and closed off to some of the experiences of nature feel when they take this plant, is they feel this emotional upheaval, which can sometimes be a little bit intense, right? Take some yarrow along with it if you want. That'll help keep those boundaries strong. But it really does open our heart and open our emotional body to the experiences that we might need to engage with once that initiation happens, right? The Latin name is Salvia. That's a genus, just like garden sage. But the species name is a little more complicated. So I'm just going to type it in the chat box. Milthiorrhiza. And it's the root that we use. Of course, hawthorn berry is very, very similar. And from the story of the May Queen and the whitethorn fairy in spring to the right delicious heart-balancing berries that you can harvest in the fall, hawthorn is another one of my go-to tonics to keep my heart open for the work that we need to engage with. You know, we make mistakes. It's inevitable. It's actually really a good sign. But if those mistakes close us off again from a place of fear, then the gift cycle stops. And what hawthorn can do is really keep our hearts open and keep us joyful, especially during times when we make mistakes, or when we try to engage and we don't do it right. And if we're fearful of this and we feel sad because of it and we feel a need to retreat again, hawthorn berry can say, hey, I got your back, I got your heart. Let's keep moving forward together. We can engage with this work. We can stay open to it. From Ayurveda and the Indian subcontinent, you know, if we have red root sage in traditional Chinese medicine and hawthorn in sort of European herbal medicine, we have Arjuna, Terminalia arjuna in Ayurveda. The bark of this tree is the cardiovascular tonic, sort of pore opening, circulation enhancing medicinal substance that Ayurveda turns to for a lot of the same things we turn to for hawthorn, for cardiovascular support, to reduce high blood pressure, but for the point of our conversation, to help us stay open and engaged to the work at hand. It's spelled Arjuna, and its genus name is Terminalia. Our species is Arjuna. And it's the bark typically that's used, although in Ayurveda, folks will use other parts of the tree as well. And last but not least, I want to turn our attention to the resins. And what I love about the resins, and this goes for a lot of aromatic plants, you know, lavender to linden to the roses, They can be initiatory for sure, because that smell grabs us. But what they're really good at doing is grounding and focusing our mind and keeping our cardiovascular system open. This is pine pitch, pine resin, but the resin of myrrh, Commiphora genus, frankincense from Boswellia, any tree exudate and resin with its strongly aromatic qualities can be burned as incense to sort of keep our mind and spirit open and bring our mindfulness to bear for the work that's at hand. But we can also take them internally in small doses to keep our circulatory system open, to keep our digestive system relaxed, right? And also keep our spirit open and ready for the work at hand. That's a big reason why incense exists, you all. Think about it. We have an initiatory experience that opens our eyes and busts open our psyche to the eros of the world. And then what do? We create a ceremony and we burn fragrant resins in order to bring our mind to bear and to keep our hearts and spirits open for that work. That's why humans burn incense, you all. That's why we have these aromatic plants in our lives. It's to keep us engaged and mindful so that we can actually begin to get into the next step, which is the work. And the work, right? Once we've figured out what it is that nourishes us, once our eyes are open, we've explored and we figured out what it is that nourishes us, how we best can be a part of that cosmic love story, that conscious fractal ecology in which we're all embedded, then we need support, because that work is not a sprint. That work is a marathon. It transcends our lifetimes, right? So this is where mushrooms and rich adaptogenic and immune tonic starchy roots come in, right? These classic tonics from the herbal medical traditions are what support us and hold us up so that we continue to engage with the work, even when it gets difficult, even when we feel stressed by it, even when we feel our spirits sagging, right? Those aromatic plants, those cardiovascular tonics, they can keep us open, but to keep us resilient and strong and working, there's nothing like the adaptogens. And first and foremost, reishi mushroom, one of my favorites, called the mushroom of immortality. It helps our spirit see that immortal connection we all share to the conscious ecology fractal, but it also nourishes our immune systems and keeps our vitality on an even keel, right? So that we can stay engaged with the work, not feel anxious, not feel scattered, not feel drained. This is a picture of the fruit of the winter cherry, ashwagandha, and it came from a huge ashwagandha bush that I was lucky to get to hang out with in Tanzania when I've been honored to be able to spend some time with some friends of mine down there in sort of the edge of the Serengeti, and ashwagandha is naturalized there. And people take it and they simmer it in milk and they use it for things like sexual potency and sexual vitality, right? But it's also really fantastic for depleted vitality, especially when we find that depleted vitality makes us unable to rest or unable to regenerate and relax. So the root of ashwagandha can be a fantastic tonic. It's very sustainable. And it's one of the things that helps me keep going, particularly if you feel yourself sort of worrying or staying up at night or unable to sort of deeply relax into regenerative sleep. Ashwagandha can be a great, great ally for you. Astragalus is another one I turn to, called the yellow leader in traditional Chinese medicine. I turn to it in part because one of the things I realized when I started engaging with this is that I needed to move my body. And at first it seemed like such a chore to go for walks or jogs in the woods, but now I can't imagine life without it. Again, I felt low energy. I started using energy and consuming energy and exercising. And what happened? I got more vital. I got more energy from that activity. But one of the things that can happen, especially when you overdo it a little bit, you go for these really long runs, is it can have a depressing effect on immune function. It can tamp down immune function a little bit. And that can make you a little more susceptible to viral infection, especially in the winter. Astragalus does a great job at maintaining the health of the immune system, nourishing immunity very deeply, also nourishing our red and white blood cells very, very deeply. And it's delicious. It can grow easily, 3 to 5 year crop. And it makes a great addition to soups, stews, and bone broth and stock, keeping your immunity strong so that when you are, once in a while, having to stay up late and do the work that you know needs to be done to fulfill the promise of the initiatory experience and actually live up to that first gift of the mandrake root, astragalus can make it so you don't get sick. And that can be an incredible bonus as well, right? And astragalus is spelled Astragalus. The official species is membranaceous, but there's a little bit of controversy there between the sort of taxonomists, and they can get very, very into it. But Astragalus membranaceous, a fantastic tonic to help us gather and do the work that nourishes us and that nourishes the world around us. What is also really important are what we call the nervine tonics. And there's so many great nervine tonics that nourish and uphold the spirit. You know, David is going to talk about these a little bit, talking about sort of herbs that can be brought to bear for supporting people who experience depression or anxiety. But I'm going to mention oats, milky oats right now, as a fantastic nervine tonic that's really safe, that can be taken in an infusion, helps us manage stress with grace, helps our nervous system stay strong while we're doing the work, especially when the work is scary or challenging or makes us feel frazzled. But there's a range of really amazing nervines that can provide this similar gift to us as we engage in this hard work. Skullcap, for example, is another really fantastic one. And beyond the world of plants, you also see medicinal mushrooms having an incredible role to play in keeping our mind sharp, keeping it well connected to spirit, and keeping us engaged in this sort of difficult work, this work of pursuing what nourishes us and building complexity and diversity and fractal resonance in this complex system in which we live, right? This is lion's mane mushroom. And I think it's so delicious that unfortunately I end up eating half of it before I can turn the rest into medicine. But it also is such an incredible tonic for the brain, for our consciousness, for our ability to focus, for our ability to manage complex cognitive tasks, right? Which especially today, right? Whoever thought a year ago that we would all have to become sort of internet technology savvy specialists? We were talking earlier that, you know, Rosemary was giving sort of pointers on how to manage video chats in Zoom. And to me, that's just incredible, right? Engaging with this new level of complexity, which is this internet technology and way of communicating to keep us sane and connected, you know, physically distant, but not necessarily socially distant, right? That takes brain power, it takes brain cycles, and an ally like lion's mane can give us a lot of support in that regard. So through the initiatory experience, right? The aha moment, the breaking open of the psyche to reveal the engagement that the world wants us to have with it, right? The eros. Through the opening that comes, it's like, I want more of this and I'm going to stay open to it. And I'm going to figure out what role I can have in it and how I can increase the complexity, diversity, and beauty of this fractal in which we live. Through the hard work of actually following through to that commitment that we make during the initiatory experience, to the power that the mandrake root promises to us, to the nourishment that the connection to Mater promises us, right? We finally come full circle. And we're able to think about giving back again. Now, if you've come to that point, I can't tell you what that will look like and how to give back to the gift cycle. All I know is that you will overwhelmingly feel a feeling to do so, and it'll be undeniable. Very few people deny it or sort of turn back at that point. It becomes the most natural, most instinctive, most right thing to do. And of course it is, because that's exactly how nature works. That's how our meadows and our forests and our deserts, our entire biosphere works that way. And because of medicinal plants, we have the gift and the honor and the privilege of being able to mindfully and consciously engage with that gift cycle that is all around us. And the plants are with us every single step of the way. And so when we come back to that last section, that communion, that idea that like, I have been working on this and it's been a labor of love and it has strengthened me. And I'm not going to say it's always been easy, but I'm so grateful for it that I need someone else to be able to experience it too. You will know what that looks like for you. You will be part of the wisdom that moves through any ecologically engaged, complex, conscious fractal. Because again, our edges don't exist. Through the ancestral memory that is encoded in our genes, all the way to the act of taking a tincture, 20 drops under the tongue 2 times a day, in order to support this work that we have to do. And then turning around after our process of self-education, after diving deeply into the connection with plants and mushrooms and the world around us, we feel called to share that with someone else. That is the love story of the universe writ large, brought into our cups of tea, our salves, our clinical consultations, our drumming around the fire, our ritual storytelling, the ceremonies of reconnection that we engage with every single day. And what you will find as you walk this path, and as we walk it all together, because we've been walking it all together since before we were human, is that that will be the true ticket to vitality and wellness for you. Not the accumulation of stuff, not the separation of one side from the other, but really this idea of nurturing the conscious ecology fractal through a well-defined process that's called a gift cycle that has been happening in every living system as it pulls itself up from its bootstraps to create the beauty, the complexity, and the diversity that we call life, that is part of this love story of the universe reconnecting with itself across billions and billions of years.